people? It is Dave, it is Duncan, back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. For this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Swiss Sludge Rock band, the Crotals. The band's new album, Conjure, will be released on November 24th on Argonauta Records.
They have clocks and chocolate and beautiful ski slopes. What are they so angry about, Dave? And cheese with a hole in it. That's what they're angry
That's
about.
probably what
They
it
get a
is.
slice of cheese and there's bits missing.
It's a fucking
Who's been eating
scam.
my cheese?
After having served for more than 20 years in various bands, the Crotals wanted to keep on playing loud music, but in a fiercer way. Originally a trio, they welcomed a second screamer in 2018 to perform the fuzzy craft of rock and roll. Following their first two records, Fuel, Flames, Blast and Horde in 2018, the Crotals found the centre of gravity of their varied influences. They now shoot straight and speak the truth. Under the benevolent legacy of their ancestral mentors, they dispatch an uttermost piece of dark clamour corroded by wasted speakers and dismembered amps. Swooned in heavy distortion, they crash overheated tubes as the drums are hammered without restraint. The Crotals' heavy indie sludge tunes only pledge allegiance to the wall of vintage Marshall amps overlooking them. That said, the Crotals are very friendly people.
Please tell me that's in the press statement.
Yep.
Absolutely amazing. We will burn your village to the ground. But we also like to knit.
The drums, guitar and baritone guitar were recorded at Blend Studio, with vocals, trumpets and overdubs recorded
Yeah, that's right, trumpets, we're going to get to that.
by Fabrice and Maud at Bellefontaine. The album was engineered and mixed by Raphael Bove, then mastered by Ladislav Agabekov at Caduceus Studio.
Raphael who?
Bove. Yes.
Just going to move to the side for a wee second. Because I'm like a 3-year-old. It's fucking ridiculous. Anyway.
It's Bove with a V.
Made it worse. We're Scottish and that sounds like something else. That sounded like a B, sounded like a B, right?
Okay. So
Anyway, Conjure.
Conjure. Yeah, I mean, class themselves as kind of sludge rock, but there's definitely some post metal going on in there.
Yep.
And a bit of a streak of the stoner in there as well at times. But
Key word in there though, they mentioned themselves, which I wanted to bring up, so I'm glad they did.
What's that?
The word indie.
Indie sludge.
The vocal technique on the less abrasive vocals, which reminded me of a lot of kind of indie rock bands of the 90s. So
Interesting.
I didn't have that in my notes, so I'm going to
Well,
disregard what you just said there and edit this section out.
let me just explain a little more, Duggan. Yeah, an interesting release, this one.
You're sighing already, or breathing, or looking weirdly. What the fuck?
I'm
Get
breathing.
to the point.
Yeah, I'm breathing. Of course I'm breathing.
I'm breathing. Who's no breathing like?
Suffocation.
You're no breathing.
No breathing. There's a lot here. A lot here these guys do well. I went back and I listened to their previous two albums. And this definitely sounds like the most kind of refined out of the three to date. You've got that big blend of sludgy post-metal balanced very well throughout the album to give you plenty of heaviness, but with some kind of grizzled melody in there as well. There is also a couple of odd choices, which I'm gonna get to.
Oh, unless you quantify this, we might actually, ladies and gents, you might be in for a treat here. We might be in completely different sides of the fence.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to this now.
Yeah, you can tell you can tell in the detail of this album, these guys have been creating music for a long time. It didn't surprise me that they'd been in bands for 20 years before doing this. It kind of threw me for a loop on the first track. After the prelude, you've got a track called Crater, right?
Yeah.
Got a lot of heft to it, big, cool mid-paced groove, some big old post-metal riffage. Also drop in some really melancholic melody. I'm like, okay, this is cool. I'm like, this sounds a little bit like Impure Wilhelmina, actually. There's a little touch of that in here.
Swiss as well, Dave.
Swiss as well. Turns out it's very Impure Wilhelmina sounding because the Impure Wilhelmina vocalist guests on that track. And I was like, all right, okay.
How you know you've been reviewing albums too long where you're literally going, this sounds like, oh, it is, aye.
Yeah. I'm like, right, okay, that's cool. A little bit odd, because if this is your first time listening to the Crotals and you hear that track, you're like, all right, okay, this guy's got Michael Schindel, this guy, yeah, he must be part of the band. No, he's not part of the band. He only guests on that one track. And these melodies are like, you would think, this must be a main feature of this band. No, they're not. So a little bit of a weird choice to kick things off with that track, with that melody, and never really come back to that style again. I kind of felt like that was cool, but maybe not sure as a first track, maybe would have placed that further in the album personally, just to save the confusion. But then you get a track called Cuts, which is a bit punkier, quicker tempo, almost like a kind of like sludge Queens of the Stone Age type vibe.
100%. 90s as fuck, Dave.
As fuck, Duncan. Featuring another guest. I'm like, what? Okay, right. So this time we've got this LaGale, who is a female indie rapper.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this track is cool. I quite like the mix on this one. But why are we opening every track on this album with a guest on it? This is a bit bizarre, it's a bit odd, but I was like, right, okay, fair enough, that's what they want to do. Track 4, Tick Tick, is basically the first point on the album where
Boom, you forgot Boom.
is just the Crotals. So there's no guests on track 4. It's the first time that you're hearing the band. Yeah, you're hearing the band without the guests. Now the Crotals actually have 2 vocalists. Granted, they both do screamy vocals, but you do get, there's 2 different tones in there. One slightly more grunge tinged almost. And that track has got a bit more of a kind of grunge kind of feel. Still like heavily sludge laden, but the riffs give off a bit of a whiff of the grunge. And I quite like that mix, and the fact that they've kept it quite interesting musically so far on the album. Quite short, just under 3 minutes, but it leads perfectly on to Silver Lakes, which is the kind of first time we get to hear the band really kind of slow things down, really, let those riffs really kind of wallow in the misery. It comes with a couple of surprises. First one being trumpets, Duncan.
Boy, does it ever.
Trumpets, which I'm down with. Cool as fuck. Love the trumpets. Reminded me of Plains of the Purple Buffalo by Shells, which is an album that I love. And they use...
Reminded me of Blood Command's recent album, which has that all the way through it. So.
Which, they use kind of the trumpets in a similar fashion. Track also features another guest. This time we have Yoni from the band.
To see a para in here.
From the band Rorkel, another Swiss band, who a little bit heavier than the Crotals, but then we've got Impetus featuring another guest. Danek from former Unfold is the former Unfold vocalist, and his vocals really stand out in the track. He's got a really cool kind of tonal melody thing going on to go with the more slightly more upbeat tempo of that track. So I enjoyed the first half of the album, albeit there's a lot of guests on that first half of the album. It has a good mix of tones, some cool instrumentation I've included. The second half of the album, no guests.
No.
And kind of settles into that like melancholic sludge sound that kind of sits at the core of the Crotals' overall sound. It's got a good mix of tempos, a little bit of trumpet again. And the closing track gives you a good finale of like gloomy riffs, but with this kind of scattering of cleaner guitars, to give you almost quite a kind of cleansing kind of end to the release. But here's my issue.
Oh, his finger went up, ladies. Did you like replay it back? Go back, pause, frame by frame.
The second half of the album is good. I enjoyed it, but not as spectacular as the first. And it's not that they are mediocre songs, it's just that some of them maybe lacked a bit of a highlight or a bit of a moment. Now, what I feel is, had they spread those tracks from the first half of the album maybe just further afield throughout the album, I think it would have stopped the second half of the album becoming a little bit forgettable. That aside, I did enjoy it. I think the production hits with plenty of like earthy kind of tones. It's really gritty. Nothing sounds overly processed. It's got weight to it, and some really nice textures in the guitars. Both vocalists have really cool tones, and I can totally see why they've opted for the use of guests on the album, because I do think maybe a whole album of just those kind of harsh tones might become slightly repetitive. So I understand that, and I think that worked. I'm just not completely convinced of the running order of the album, how they've placed the tracks. It made it slightly front filled, a bit kind of lopsided for me. That's the thoughts. What are you thinking?
So I'm maybe not that far off you, but I don't hold it as much of a negative as you do. I'll be surprised to see how far our grades are out. I actually thought this was really well done. The reason behind that is I think the first half of the album gives off a ton of personality, which now with context and not doing any research, because I don't do research, makes a lot more sense. But the back half of the album feels like it focuses into a specific tone and groove, and then leans into that heavily. So I kind of feel like the opening of the album is designed in such a way to kind of keep you not necessarily guessing, but keep you kind of flight of foot, so to speak, like weaving your way through, and then you hit that groove, and when you hit that groove you get locked in hard to the end of this album. As someone that had never heard the Crotals before, I think they do a ton of stuff really fucking well. That kind of desert rocky doomy sludgy thing that they have just in the pocket whenever they want to pull it out, that groove based, headbangy sort of thing, they do it so cleanly. And what they do as well is they mix it up with like really cleverly placed atmosphere and surround it with cleaner elements of guitars or simscapes in such a way that give it a huge amount of depth over something that is basically down. You're like fucking 1, 2, but then you get these things in the background, this reverby wall that just kind of makes it sound so much bigger and so much heavier than it is. The guest vocals earlier on in the album, whilst not reading the press statement, I was very aware that there was completely different vocal tones coming in from all angles. I kind of like as an introduction in. Now, I suppose we're approaching the Crotals as people that had never experienced them before, so from that point of view, that might be jarring. Having not listened to the previous stuff before, I don't know if this is something that they want to do in previous releases. Did they have a lot of guest vocals before, a lot of collaborators? I also kind of feel like even if they didn't, I get why they're here now. You mentioned that the band might feel that locking in the sound they have for a full album might get a bit repetitive, maybe a bit not boring, but predictable. I can kind of see that argument, but then I also see the argument of, if you've been playing in bands for 20 years, you're in a new band, that new band is now on its third album, did you say? Third album. And you're now surrounded by a scene that is much more interesting. You've got a lot more different people. Why would you not want to collaborate? As a musician, when you get to, even as a podcaster, when you get to a certain point of, I have recorded 15 years of my voice, and now I get an opportunity to bounce off other people. That's exciting musically, and it allows them, I think, especially in the first half of the album, opportunities to really stretch that sound a little bit more. I also feel that if you're a fan of the Crotals, though, that could get frustrating. If the back half of this album is essentially what people are used to hearing, I don't know if dispersing the tracks throughout aid that, or highlight more the fact that this is a Crotal song, this is a guest, this is a Crotal song, this is a guest. So the idea of kind of lumping them all kind of front loaded and then giving you the, oh well, listen, if this isn't your bag, after track 5 things settle in, kind of almost works for me as well. It's not the common approach.
No.
So they're definitely fighting against the grain. A lot of bands that have a lot of guest appearances will space them out. But then even when you were mentioning all that, I was thinking about Teenage Wrist, who have an album that I love this year, which has a fucking ton of guest appearances. Loads of people guest on that album. Musically, I don't think necessarily vocally, but a shitload of them. And they're dotted in no logical order, where you might be getting 2 back-to-back, and then 1 that's just them, and then 3, and then like 4 that aren't, and whatnot. So I suppose it comes down to groove on the album, and the groove in the album actually worked for me really, really well. I think the front half of the album does kind of guide you in and lead you in such a way that when the back half of the album really slams you, and it methodically slams you, it slips into a groovy groove, can't think of a better word to describe it, a groovy groove, that when that kicks in, you're just locked kind of in with the band then. Kind of feels like that way when you're at a gig and you're kind of outside the crowd and you're like, I want to get a wee bit closer, and there's a point where everyone's around you and you're like, I don't want to be, oh right, we're moving forward. I don't want to be like, I'm on the stage, you know what I mean? There's that point of what they're doing that I kind of like. Production wise, this is fucking phenomenal. Like, heavy when it needs to be heavy, clean when it needs to be clean, it accentuates all the different parts, it's dealing with a lot of moving stuff. The brass section you mentioned, that there's some strings and synth work in here which are really fucking cool as well, that just spreads the sound out. Vocally, I love the 2 original vocalist tones. They, like you said, they're not that dissimilar, but they have their own unique tone.
Yeah.
I don't like bands that have 2 vocalists where the vocalists kind of sound like one could take the night off and they'd be fine if they were 2 of them. Yeah. Like, there's enough in the personality and the tone that kind of works here. The guest vocals add to that juxtaposition of those sounds really, really, really work well. I don't think this is groundbreaking, earth-shattering stuff at all, but I actually find that a really satisfying listen front to back. And we were joking off air. One of my favourite opening riffs now this year is on track 9, Black Cat, where we get a bit of fucking screamy vocals and then a riff that just makes your bells drop. A bow, bow, bow. It's fucking so good, and that track comes back to that riff more times than a track should, but I love it because it does. So yeah, I'm kind of on with this one. I don't think you're wrong. I think a smarter band, and I'm not calling them silly by any stretch of the imagination, a smarter band would sit down with a big fucking whiteboard with loads of different tracks and say, right, well, there's too many guests here, and move them around. Actually, I don't necessarily think it hurts the overall listen for me, because I look at it weirdly in a position that the first half of the album is almost beckoning you into their sound, and then the last half of the album is almost like strapping you into the chair and doing the Clockwork Orange Eyes thing, but to your ears instead, where it's like that, here's our sound, and you're now with it to the end. I think it finishes super strong as well. Yeah. A Course into Trauma is a great one too. And Black Cat before that is just the most disgusting riff. I can't stress that. Bow, dow, dow. It's fucking just Bowie, Bowie, Bowie. And not David.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious to see how far we're off each other, but I enjoyed my listen on this one quite a bit.
Interesting. So, scores for the new Crotals album. I don't think this is a bad album at all. I think they are very good at what they do. And as I said, you can hear that quality in the songwriting. They've clearly been at this for a while. I enjoyed the first half of the album for its variety and its distinction. I felt like those were the more memorable tracks for me. I just found it an odd choice to front fill the album with those tracks and the guests, which for me made the second half of the album less eventful. Although I would agree, closes very strongly. I loved the last track on the album. I'm going to go 3.5 out of 5 on this one. What about yourself?
4.
4?
So yeah, we're not hugely far off.
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't. There's not as much a downgrade to me as there is for you in the structure of the album. Like, to me, it flowed a bit better in that I look at the first half of the album marginally different to you. So as a result of that cut that you have of us front loaded with this really interesting stuff, and then the back half of the album feels like a band just playing an album. To me, that front half of the album interestingly gets my attention on the back half of the album, where the band really locks into their sound in a way where I can follow it through at the end. So 4 for me, Dave.
Nice.
4.
Cool. That is the new album from the Crotals, out on November 24th on Argonauta Records. Links below to the band and the Bandcamp. Check it out. Let us know what you think. That is the review. Thank you for checking out. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone. Look at that. Love hearts.